What's up? This is the Novorossiysk, a Russian attack submarine. In May 2025, it made a provocative passage through the English Channel, surfaced, and was deliberately visible. As if to say, "We're here and you can't stop us." The Royal Navy, the British Navy, had to escort it out with ships and helicopters. It was a clear show of force and a typical attitude from Russia. Naval intimidation near NATO. But at the end of September, that same submarine was forced to surface in the Strait of Gibraltar. But this time, it wasn't a show of force. It was something that many see as shameful and that exposes secrets Russia wanted to keep hidden. Let's begin by answering a question I know many of you are wondering about. After all, what really happened? Between September 26 and 27, the Novorossiysk suffered a catastrophic technical failure. It wasn't just any malfunction. The submarine's fuel system started leaking, and we're not talking about a small leak. Diesel was pouring directly into the submarine's bilge. Liters and more liters of fuel were accumulating inside a confined space. Think about that for a second. You're inside a metal tube underwater and fuel is filling the compartment around you. The vapor is toxic. One spark and nothing would remain. On the 27th, the crew acknowledged this, stating that there was a risk of explosion. We're talking about 52 people trapped inside a potential bomb. Now comes the most shocking part. The crew couldn't fix the problem. The reason? There were no spare parts on board, none. And even more serious, there was no qualified specialist on the crew who could make the repair. Imagine that, a combat submarine on an active mission without the basic tools for its own survival. The solution they found was, at the very least, desperate. To prevent the accumulated fuel from exploding, the crew would have to pump all that diesel directly into the Mediterranean Sea. In other words, they would have to create an environmental disaster in one of the busiest shipping routes in the world. It was either that or explode. And do you know what's the scariest part of this story? Russia didn't announce any of this. The Russian Ministry of Defense remained completely silent. The story was told by a Telegram channel that's known for leaking information from inside Russian security agencies. And, as you can probably imagine, the Russian government hates this channel. In fact, they've labeled it as a foreign agent and are constantly trying to remove it from the platform. When a government tries to censor a source, it's because it's hitting a sore spot. And the wound here is deep. Because while Russia remained silent, NATO was watching everything. British, French, Spanish ships, patrol planes. The submarine, which was supposed to be invisible, was now under the spotlight being tracked in real time. Open-source intelligence analysts were tracking the movement of Novorossiysk and its support tug through the Strait of Gibraltar. Now stop and think. A submarine works because of one thing: secrecy. Its strength lies in not being seen. Novorossiysk, well, it completely lost that advantage. And anyone who thinks this submarine must be some old scrap, a leftover from the Soviet era that Russia insists on using, is mistaken. No, it's worse than that. The Novorossiysk was built in 2010, entered service in 2014, and was only 11 years old when it broke down. It's an improved Kilo-class submarine, Project 636.31 of Russia's most modern models. NATO calls it the black hole because it is extremely quiet and almost impossible to detect when it's operating on its electric batteries. It is 74 meters long, has a crew of 52 people, and can stay at sea for 45 days. And it's not a harmless submarine. It carries 6 torpedo tubes and can launch 18 torpedoes or naval mines. And most importantly, it can fire cruise missiles. Caliber, These missiles have a long range, can hit land targets, and are capable of carrying nuclear warheads. We're talking about a submarine that was on active combat duty, not one that was stored in a port waiting for maintenance. It was on a mission, representing Russia in the Mediterranean. And, as we showed at the beginning of the video, 4 months before it broke down, it had passed through the English Channel in a provocative way, showing strength, as if to say to the world, "We are here." Now it was dead in the water. And this isn't the only case. In June 2024, another Russian submarine arrived in Havana, Cuba, the Kazan, a Yasin M-class nuclear submarine, the most advanced in the Russian fleet. Russia made a big show of this visit. They wanted to show power, but when the Kazan arrived, photographs revealed a serious problem. Large pieces of the hull's silencing panels were coming off. Those panels absorb sound. They're essential to keep the submarine invisible. To sonar, without them, the submarine gets noisy and loses its main advantage. For a submarine that was supposed to be the pride of the fleet, seeing pieces falling off was embarrassing. There's more. In August 2025, a Russian corvette called Vishny Volotyak collided with a civilian oil tanker in the Sea of Azov. The hull was severely damaged. And do you want to know what Russia did? They forged official documents and said the damage was caused by Ukrainian drones. They blatantly lied to cover up their incompetence. You can see a pattern forming. Look, the Russian Navy isn't just facing technical problems, it's experiencing a systemic collapse. And this is happening for 3 main reasons. First, there are sanctions. Since 2014, but especially after 2022, Russia has been under heavy sanctions. These sanctions target the defense sector. Russia has always depended on foreign components for advanced systems. Getting those parts is now difficult, costly, and time-consuming. They try to import through third countries, but this creates bottlenecks, and when parts are missing, maintenance doesn't happen. That happens. Second, the economy is in war mode. All resources are going to Ukraine. Tanks, ammunition, equipment for the ground troops. And do you know what happens to the routine maintenance of ships that are already deployed? That takes a back seat. Novorossiysk is a prime example. The submarine needed parts, but those parts weren't available. Maybe they were in some warehouse, maybe they didn't even exist anymore. The logistics system is totally broken. And lastly, and most surprisingly, the Black Sea Fleet was devastated, and the Novorossiysk belongs to that fleet. Just so you know, that fleet suffered unimaginable losses. Ukraine, a country without a significant navy, destroyed between 1/3 and 40% of the Russian ships in the Black Sea. And it did this using Neptune anti-ship missiles. Storm Shadow missiles supplied by the West and surface drones. Small unmanned vessels loaded with explosives. The list of losses is impressive. One of the most emblematic was the cruiser Moskva, the flagship ship sunk in April 2022. But there were also multiple landing ships destroyed, corvettes, patrol boats, and in September 2023, a Ukrainian attack on the Sevastopol shipyard severely damaged the Rostov-on-Don, a sister submarine to the Novorossiysk. Even submarines in the port were not safe. These losses forced Russia to withdraw its most valuable ships from Sevastopol in occupied Crimea to the port of Novorossiysk on the Russian mainland. It was a humiliating retreat. Russia lost control of the Western Black Sea and its blockade ended. And Ukraine? Well, they managed to establish a humanitarian corridor to export grain, a strategic victory for them. But there's an even deeper blow. Something that makes the failure at Novorossiysk not just predictable, but inevitable: the loss of Tartus. That's because the Mediterranean is a strategic region. For NATO, it's the southern flank. For Russia, it's a way to project power in the Middle East, North Africa, and challenge NATO. Since 2013, Russia has kept a permanent naval force in the Mediterranean, but this presence depended on... Tartus was the only Russian naval base outside the territory of the former Soviet Union. During the Russian intervention in the Syrian civil war, Russia expanded and modernized this base. Tartus provided everything a fleet needs: resupply, refueling, maintenance, crew rotation. Without this, keeping ships in the Mediterranean for long periods is logistically impossible. But at the end of 2024, the regime of Bashar al-Assad fell. The new government of Syria canceled the agreement with Russia, and so the Russians were forced to evacuate the base quickly, a humiliating withdrawal. And the impact was immediate. Diesel-electric submarines like the Novorossiysk are not like nuclear submarines. They need to recharge their batteries frequently. That means going to a port or using the snorkel near the surface. Without Tartus, keeping these submarines operational in the Mediterranean became unfeasible. In January 2025, naval analysts reported that Russia no longer had any submarines in the Mediterranean. The Novorossiysk was the last one to leave through the Strait of Gibraltar. Its return in 2025 was an attempt to maintain the illusion of naval presence. But it was a bluff. Russia was trying to operate without the necessary infrastructure, and Novorossiysk was operating under extreme pressure. Far from any friendly port capable of providing proper maintenance and with a broken supply chain behind it. The fuel system failure wasn't bad luck, it was the physical consequence of a logistically impossible operation. It was the first critical part to give way under these unsustainable conditions. The submarine wasn't just leaking fuel, it was leaking the last remnants of Russian naval credibility in the region. And for Vladimir Putin, this scene is familiar, painfully familiar, because he has lived through this nightmare before. The date was August 12, 2000. The nuclear submarine K-141 Kursk was sinking in the Barents Sea. 118 people died. A defective torpedo exploded during exercises, causing the incident. The initial explosion triggered a second catastrophic explosion, which destroyed the front of the submarine. But what made the Kursk an even greater tragedy was the government's response. Vladimir Putin was in his first year as president. When the accident happened, he was on vacation at a resort on the Black Sea. And do you know what his reaction was? He stayed there for 4 days. Meanwhile, Russian sailors were dying. Russia also didn't ask for international help right away, but the United Kingdom and Norway offered advanced rescue submersibles. Russia refused. And do you want to know the reason? Pride, fear of exposing the Navy's incompetence, fear of showing weakness. Later, a note was recovered from the body of an officer. 23 sailors had survived the initial explosion. They took refuge in the rear compartment, waited for rescue. Russian rescue attempts repeatedly failed. When Russia finally accepted foreign help, it was too late. They were all dead. Putin faced a tough choice in 2000. Admit failure and accept help from the West. Or preserve national pride through secrecy and denial at the cost of his sailors' lives. He chose pride. The lesson the Russian government took from the Kursk wasn't about improving naval safety. It was about controlling information. In 2000, Putin was slammed by the Russian media, which was still independent at the time. ANTV broadcasted devastating criticism of the government and interviewed grieving families. It was a public relations disaster, an extreme political vulnerability for the new president. In the months and years that followed, the government took control of the main television networks. It ensured this public humiliation would never happen again. 25 years later, the Novorossiysk faces the same dilemma, with Russia and NATO in direct confrontation because of Ukraine. Accepting help from an adversary would be even more humiliating. History suggests that if the situation had escalated, the crew of the Novorossiysk could have been sacrificed for political pride, just like the survivors of the Kursk were. But there is a difference in 2025. The control of information that Putin built over 2 decades is cracking. Decentralized platforms such as Telegram exist. Investigative channels publish these leaks. Open source intelligence tracks movements in real time. Now, a total Soviet-style cover-up is no longer possible. As you can see, the image of the Russian attack submarine Novorossiysk, disabled and adrift in NATO's backyard, is more than just an isolated naval incident. It's a moment where all the signs of Russian military decline converge on a single rusted hull. Now, I want to know your opinion. Do you think Russia can still maintain its position as a global naval power? Or has that era ended? Leave your answer here in the comments. If this content added value for you, share it with someone who is also interested in these topics, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. See you next time.